Welcome to another episode of You Should Read This with my co-reader, Tom van der Lubbe. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Looking forward to our discussion.
And you're in Switzerland right now, and it's pretty hot, right?
Yeah.
And we've just had a nice spell here in England. Maybe that was our summer. That could quite possibly have been our summer, our last 5 or 6 days of sun. We're now back to rain. Anyway, we're here to talk about Mariana Mazzucato book. Her book is called Mission Economy, a moonshot guide to changing capitalism. And this is one that you picked, Tom.
Yeah. And I first want to tell why I wanted to discuss the book with you. There are more reasons for that. One of the reasons is that she's a professor in London. But she has a much more international focus. She's one of the advisors of the European Commission. And she is one of the, I would say, new group of women professors in this economic space, which, let's say, you can also take Donut Economy, Kate Raworth, etc. Yeah. So there's a bigger group. She also mentions them. At the end of the book, they support each other also a little bit, and they are all discussing, I would say, to put it a little bit broader, the shareholder value economy, let's say from the 80s, and they are, let's say, more thinking about a more broader discussion which goes on in society, role of business, role of the government, etc., etc. So she's one of those people. And she is a very energetic person. I also managed to listen to her live, and she's really it's really interesting to hear her speak. And this is I think even her third book. I'm not quite sure. I think it's the third book. And I want to tell something about the way this book is structured. The first part is I would say a reflection which you can also find in her last book. It's more general discussion about economics and the role of the state. We will dive into that later. Then the second part is a description of the Apollo project. That's where the title comes from, this whole moonshot idea of a big goal. And the third and fourth part is much more into how would we implement this way of thinking, this moonshot way of thinking. And in the end, it's a little bit about thinking about a new Green Deal or other big social projects. So that's the way the book is structured.
Yeah, that's right. Well, where should we kick off then? Do you want to start with your overall reflections? How did it leave you feeling after reading it?
Yeah, I think let's say what is interesting is, but perhaps we should just dive into it, and then also see how we will discuss on that. I would say it is interesting to take this first part, and she calls this myths. She want to show that a certain way of thinking about the role of the state is not correct, and then she takes, let's say, it's not especially at the beginning, but it's a little bit further on. She takes 5 myths where she discusses the role of the state, and I think you call debunking, or she just says it's just not true. And that would be perhaps an interesting starting point to discuss this. And I would just take one out to start with, because there's an interesting actual context. And that would be, for instance, that I take the third one here, that the government should be run like a company, as an example, and that competition always improves something. But there are certain things which can't be run that way. And I would take an actual example of the public transport, where Britain started to privatize much earlier, and she also takes this as an example in the book, much earlier than all the other countries had privatized British Rail, or at least partly, etc. And now what I find very interesting is that because Britain started so early, you have a very good way of analyzing what went well and what didn't go so well. So I would say, I mean, I live in Switzerland. The Swiss are always the last who do something. That has sometimes negative aspects if you talk about innovation. On the other hand, for instance, about privatization, it has been very interesting because, for instance, the public transport is still totally state-owned, and all the buses and local transport is also state-owned. And I would consider, and I know the public system here in Switzerland pretty well, because I live here, but I also know the British system a little bit. I would say this is a typical example of public goods, which work pretty well or much better if you don't privatize it, because there can be a totally different goal. So public transport would be, for instance, also in this new discussion about climate, you could discuss if public transport is a typical role which the government should take care of, because you want have, let's say, a lot of people in public transport and not on the roads if you want to lower CO2 emissions, as an example. Or if you take energy, the energy provider is owned here by the people in the city. It's still state-owned or communal, how you want to call it. And the goal of an energy provider at the moment is not to sell more energy all the time. No, to sell less, because we want to solve our climate problem. And that's what she's doing in this first part of the book. So perhaps you want to add something on that, because these are 5 myths she discusses.
Yes, and the other thing that I think she talks about and emphasizes a lot is this idea of the market failure theory, and wanting to move away from that. So market failure theory is this idea that the government is there to come in and fix failing markets, right? And she's saying that ought not to be the role of government, and rather government should be in this role of co-creator or co-shaper with other institutions of markets, and should play a much more active role and with much more entrepreneurial spirit, and in the way that Apollo, in the way that the US government took on the mission to get to the moon. And you know, whilst I applaud the sentiment, right, this idea that government could act in that way, I am deeply, and of course she does use the example of the Apollo mission. I'm deeply skeptical as to whether governments can operate in that way, and indeed to some degree, like as I said to you before the show, being like my heart being much more on the libertarian end. Do we even want to like try that with government? Like, is that even something we want to give? Give our money to almost to invest in a project like that, to kind of transform government to take on a different role. I'm deeply skeptical of giving more power to governments in that way. But I am attracted to the sentiment, right? This idea that governments, reimagine themselves. Yeah.
Let's say I'm much more a European continental thinker. And I think, just to take another example, if you take education, I would say, and you can also take the statistics, that the countries where you have a very broad, open system, which is just paid by the government. The Dutch university system is such a system. Everything is just paid by the government, is much more efficient in a way, and works pretty well, because it's also very broad. But I can also take housing as an example. and that's the part where I'm active in, is because we do mortgage advice. There's a lot of research done about building. So if you want to build enormous amount of houses and also permanently, that's done in the communal housing let's say area, and that worked, for instance, pretty well in the Netherlands. So we had a lot of housing crisis. They were always solved by corporations funded by the government. That worked pretty well. Why did it work pretty well? Because those risks of building an enormous amount of houses only the government can take. Or if you talk about roads or public infrastructure in general, those are such enormous infrastructure projects that if you see that if this is done by commercial parties, and that's why I took the housing as an example, there it stops. So depending on economic cycles, they build or they don't build, and the government always can just continue to build. And that is an enormous problem in the Netherlands at the moment, because they have taken away a lot of power of these corporations, of the communal housing projects. And then at a certain point, when there is a recession, nobody builds anything anymore. So I think there are quite some good examples. But you can also see, for instance, if you talk about trains and buses, from a commercial point of view, it doesn't make sense to operate buses here in the Swiss mountains, because there are just not enough people who are using this. So then you would just say, no, that's from a commercial point of view, that's not interesting. I would like to have the rail to the airport from London City, which I understand, because that makes sense and that you can do this commercially. But somewhere in the highlands, that's just not attractive to operate those services. And then in the end, it means there is no service at all anymore.
Well, yeah, but that's I think potentially a fallacy you fall into if your only solution is a government one, and you look at that problem, you think, well, I can't imagine a private entity fulfilling that need, then that becomes self-fulfilling. But what about in that situation of the Swiss mountains, that maybe, there's a local farmer who uses his van, once a week to do a little run and take a few of the little old ladies to the supermarket, right? Who knows? The community could solve those problems in ways that we can't envisage if we, trust in the entrepreneurial spirit of people in communities to solve the needs within those communities.
Yeah, but if you just take, for instance, education as an example, and the funny thing is that there is a lot of data, so you can take OECD or other data. It's very simple. The best school system there is in Finland. So, and you can go on and on. So what I always find interesting is, let's say, if you would have the opinion that a lot of companies are able to do a lot of things better, yeah, probably in a lot of cases that is the case. But if you talk about public goods, and if you just compare public infrastructure, I would say the data just prove the opposite. And you can take education, you can take also the way crises are managed, because it's much more stabilized. Denmark is an example in the corona crisis. But just take university as an example, and then you have, which will be probably our next book, it also has an enormous function to stabilize a society, because you have this anti-fragile aspects, which also have a huge influence. So as an example, if you have a system where you have to pay for the education of your children, then this risk of taking your children out of school is connected to having a job or not.
Right, but then the libertarian example I often hear cited, and I think I've shared this with you before, is that in sort of late 1800s in America, there was no state education system as I understand it. And so what would happen is these private schoolhouses would crop up, And the way that those communities solved the problem of education for people with few resources was that there would be a kind of pyramid system in which the kids who were slightly higher, a couple of years ahead would get paid pennies by the kids below to teach them, maths or English or whatever. And so all these kids became not only students, but, part-time teachers to the kids. And the whole thing was very inexpensive. And maybe the whole community paid for like one teacher to run the whole establishment. But the whole thing, worked as a private entity that served the community. And so again, it comes back to, can you trust communities to solve these problems themselves? And my stance is always, well, yes, we can.
So, but at the moment, if you talk about education, Scandinavia is on the top.
No, I agree with you now. But what you're doing is you're comparing all state systems, because virtually all modern economies have now developed as the state and state functions in all of these areas, including education. And then if you were to compare across, Scandinavia and Finland have the best ones, and I think there's a ton to be applauded about the Finnish education system. I mean, it's wonderful the way that they get the kids involved in setting the curriculum. They're not these hot houses, with hours and hours of homework. There's lots of time for free play and outdoor play. From my understanding of the Finnish system, it's a wonderful system. But that's not to say that private institutions couldn't create similar levels of education and do it inexpensively. Another example jumping outside of the education system is in India. There's a network of hospitals that have got private institutions who have got the cost of heart surgery down to a fraction of what it costs in most nations. And they also have a sliding scale where if you've got a certain income level, you pay a certain fee, and then that gives them enough profit to subsidize heart operations for people with low incomes. I think even provide it for free in some cases. So, another example of private institutions meeting the needs of the community.
Okay, but that's the first part of the book, where she takes a lot of examples. And perhaps to add is also that, and that is also a reference to her first book, is that she proved that all this innovation which is done mainly goes back to fundamental research which is done by the government. So the internet, DARPA, etc. It's mainly, or in most cases, is from the defense budgets. By the way, if it is GPS or internet, etc. And she takes also CERN in Switzerland. So that's where this first part is about.
Yeah, no, and again, my skepticism is how much is she cherry picking, right? I mean, if you look at take a historical sweep, and plenty of examples of amateur inventions coming up with, fundamentally the Wright brothers, right? They're just a couple of mechanics doing it they invent the first airplane. Tesla, Edison, these guys aren't working in government departments. So, my question there, and I was, at the time to run the data, but I had a deep suspicion there that she was cherry picking.
I really hope you will invite her because she's just around the corner. And I hope you will discuss this with her if she's cherry picking. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, she might prove it entirely wrong, but there's certainly many, many examples which she omitted, of amateur inventors, achieving breakthroughs in innovation. Yeah.
So, but that's at least the first part, and then it's about Mission Impossible, and perhaps you should dive into this, or is this okay?
Yeah. So this is basically the idea, right? That you take that spirit, don't you, of the Apollo mission of putting people on the moon, and you then apply that to the major challenges that we have in the world right now. And of course, she focuses on the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17, I believe. And she, is advocating for, and this is where I find a contradiction, right? She's so in the early part of the book, she's to quote her, she's sort of lauding the idea of having, now imagine the transformation and this is where she's talking about government institutions and talking about specifically in the US here. Imagine the transformation from a bureaucratic top-down administration to a goal-oriented stimulator of new ideas from the ground up. But then she goes on to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, they're top-down, right? These are these have been set by a group of people with a certain set of values, and nothing wrong with the goals, nothing wrong with those people with that set of values, but it's very much set from, however broadly they cast the net to come up with those goals, it represents a certain worldview. That then there's an expectation that this is the set of values and these should be the goals that the entire globe get behind. I mean, that just feels inherently top down as a construct. And almost inevitably is going to curate bureaucracies around it, just from the way that it's been developed. So this is where I took some issue with the idea that then, yes, we had this successful Apollo mission, but now we should envisage basically all global challenges through this one set of goals and create programs around it. It just felt like an inherently top-down approach. Which is something I didn't really resonate with me in the broad sweep of how she was laying it out.
So you don't think it's a good example?
Well, I just, and that's not to say that she doesn't. So it's not so much as I just, what's interesting about the book is, and I think where there's a lot of value in it, is she does highlight what I believe the future is, which is where we know we have, tensions in our communities and problems in our environment and so on. The real difference making is going to be from communities, right? And she talks about Sweden, the Healthy Streets Project. She talks about, around the corner from her in Camden, where they brought people together to work to improve all of the housing estates in that borough of London. And those kind of initiatives where the values and the goals are going to be derived from those communities, they'll choose their sustainable development goals. Thank you very much. And I think that those projects will have a much greater chance of success than anything that we're trying to derive from whichever committee it was who came up with those, global goals.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't agree with you. So if you just take an example, at the moment, I think most people will agree on that climate is the major topic. But if we just take a very actual topic, the whole tax paying topic for big corporations, the real big topics are not, you can't solve them on a local level. So they only can be solved on a national level or even on an international level. And just to take something from the past, if you just see the development of international law, for instance, which and most of it is just very boring stuff. A lot of treaties about where borders are and sea and how you should act in a certain sphere, or how you have to deal with diplomatic relations or embassies and whatsoever, or if you can use gas in wars, or child soldiers, etc. So there's a lot of stuff which works pretty well, but we're always focused on which doesn't, on the things which don't work pretty well. But if you just take, for instance, the UN, there's a lot of there are a lot of topics which are just dealt with, and that's typically something which we agree on an international level. But also, if you have to trade, for instance, take the whole Brexit topic as an example, we are not aware of how many institutional international treaties and agreements are in place, and we don't realize how smooth all this stuff works out until we just have a situation about a COVID crisis, and you have to how can I show if I want to travel from A to B, etc. Or then you have a Brexit and you suddenly realize, we're importing an enormous amount of stuff every day. So I think that this whole idea of taking a top-down approach to our major problems is the right one. And then you can still say, okay, shall we save the planet? As a very simple example, because that's where the topic is all about. And how do we solve this on a local level? And then you, in the Paris Climate Agreement, you decide on a certain, let's say, goal, and then you give the freedom or the implementation to all those countries and say, okay, how will you reach this goal? Do you want to close down your most worst factories, or do you want to subsidize your public transport, or do you want solar panels on all your houses? That's up to you. But we agree on this goal, Paris Climate Agreement. So I don't know what would be the alternative.
So I think it's a question of you solve this through transparency. So there's something to be said for finding and developing platforms which allow people to see the whole. So no matter where we're situated in society, we can somehow draw links between our individual actions or the collective action of our locality and how this is contributing to a much bigger picture. So kind of that level of a kind of global lens on our impact as individuals makes sense at some level to me. But then the idea that we create coordinated global action through, the levers of state in each country, let's say, that is where I have a sort of a visceral resistance to that. And the idea that, major state actors are going to solve this, that is, I'm skeptical.
But we're doing all the time.
Sorry?
We're doing all the time. But
yeah, that's not to say we don't do it all the time. And of course, states do it all the time. And, that they are major actors and players in addressing global issues. Like, I'm not saying that doesn't exist and that isn't the paradigm. That absolutely is the paradigm. I'm just saying that, the libertarian in me is very skeptical of that and has a higher degree of faith in what could be done, although it's difficult for us to imagine, in local communities through voluntary action, assuming people are equipped with the information. We've seen examples of that in the UK, right? There are these I forget the name of the initiative, but there's these kind of green towns, right? Where they together as a town decide, okay, we're going to become carbon neutral as a town, or we're going to become off grid as a town, right? We're going to develop all of our own energy within the community.
Yeah, but you're not going to solve the problems because they are too big. So let's say people will agree. Just take tax example, because that was something which for a long time nobody thought that there would be a solution, because everybody said now all those countries are competing with each other, and the multinationals just ask those national entities or those countries, shall I put my head office here? Can you tell me what I shall pay? But I will also discuss with a lot of other countries. Perhaps I move from country A to country B, and then suddenly that's also something which let's say from a historical point of view was clear that would happen, that because of the big deficits and a lot of let's say companies and people who don't pay taxes, you have to solve this in the end. So the question was, when will this happen? Biden was the one, and he said, okay, if I want to do a lot of public projects, or if I have to pay the bill after the Corona crisis, I have to fix this tax holes. And then you have the G7, or I don't know how many countries there are at the moment. And then they say, okay, shall we solve it? And then on that level, perhaps it will be 15% minimum tax for all the corporations, and that problem is solved. But if you have to stabilize, or if you have to, there is no countervailing power in this global business environment. So if you want to tax Apple or Google, and they all use, let's say, Amsterdam and Dublin to not pay any taxes at all, then you have to solve this. And you're not able to solve this on a national way. You can say, you naughty Dutch, you have to close the tax hall in Amsterdam. And then the Dutch say, yeah, but we have a few thousand lawyers in Amsterdam who earn a lot of money on this, and we don't care. And this will in the end be solved, because other countries will just say, sorry, we are losing too much money because Apple is not paying taxes because they are using your loophole. And with climate is exactly the same. So you can do, let's say, a carbon neutral village somewhere with a lot of people who also do, and I'm a little bit provocative, do a lot of other stuff like meditation and biological farming, etc. But in the end, everybody understands that you have to find an agreement on taxing kerosene. Do you say kerosene? So the fuel for the airplanes, because as long as you can fly for 25 euros with EasyJet from London to Barcelona, then you are not going to take the train.
Right. And so you use two examples there. So first of all, the tax one, look, I agree, right? If you've got these major, multinational corporations dodging tax across jurisdictions, then the only way you can solve that is through coordinating tax jurisdictions to stop them, right? And so but if you consider those dynamics, then yes, that's the only way you can solve it. But again, is there another way, right? We now have that bypasses that whole issue, right? Because we now have blockchain, for example, as a decentralized means of creating networks where there is no centralized entity that's able to move money between jurisdictions and avoid tax in that way, right? So could we not envisage and encourage to use Mazzucato's paradigm, co-create and co-shape decentralized entities who are operating in a completely different paradigm, where you're not going to create organizations that are able to do this in the first place, because they can't centralize and grow in that way.
But you can't solve this with blockchain. So if you talk about, let's say, minimal taxes, then it's just an international agreement, and you can let's say use blockchain for decentralized information, etc. But in the end, there has to be a decision or an agreement on how do you deal with this topic or that topic. So I think that her third part in the book, and her main topic is the New Green Deal, and she was searching for, let's say, a governmental project, and then she took the Moon project as an example because it was a positive one. It inspired a lot of people. But you can also take the New Deal, which I would have found even more appropriate. But there are a lot of real big public projects in the past. It can be electrification or building railroads or building public schools in certain periods of history. And in most countries, or you see then that everything was built in the same era. And railroads is a very, very good example. In certain countries, you see that all those stations, if they are still there, have exactly the same architecture. So they're just building the whole railroad and just had a pretty fast infrastructure in only a couple of years. And that's something which she proposes. And I think she's totally right. And I don't think that if you talk about climate change, there is no interest for a company to produce at higher costs. There is no interest to propose as an airliner to tax kerosene. Why would you? So you're even lobbying against it. So the only actor which is able to solve this, and this has been with all the major, let's say, big projects, if it's about voting rights or equal rights or doesn't matter what it is. In the end, it's a kind of collective political decision. It can be on the national level, it can be on the international level, but it's not something which is solved by local communities or individual players.
Well, yeah, and this is where we differ because on the one hand, I agree with you, right? Like if the only way to stop an airline, I don't know, not burning more kerosene, right? The only way to incentivize it is because it doesn't pay for its externalities, right? And if you accept
external
the impact of it, so I totally buy it, and the only way that you can do that at some level is to coerce them in some way. However, right, that's not the only way of looking at it. Again, if you put trust in local communities and you put trust in citizens to, once you provide them with the data, to come up with their own solutions. I just think that's a more sustainable, a more humane way of approaching this, right?
But how would you how would you implement the Paris Agreement? You say, okay, I mean, you even, let's say in your worldview, you wouldn't even have a Paris Agreement, or would you have one?
Well, it's not to necessarily like rail against the Paris Agreement. I suppose it's what's interesting for me is that, and she does do it to some extent. It's where she places the influence. It's the emphasis. So she does bring out some of these projects, like I mentioned, the Camden initiative that she mentioned, and the Sweden Healthy Streets. But her bias seems to be towards major governmental action. Mm-hmm. To solve what she perceives as being, global problems that can only be solved with, major state actors, right? And I suppose where I'm coming at for it is, yes, these issues may exist, but just thinking about how we get governments to do better is not, for me, the most productive way about thinking solving the problem. It's more about how can we identify and amplify the actions of individuals and small communities across the globe that addresses these problems, and encourage more of that, right? As a means to solve this, rather than because I just think inevitably, if you try and create big state programs, I mean, look at it. Where's it across the globe to solve these things? They're vulnerable to capture by interests. It's very difficult to transform these organizations away from being, self-serving bureaucracies. Whereas it's much easier to get, authentic, effective action, in my view, at a lower level. I mean, it's back to the book we reviewed previously, Small is Beautiful, and that's something I hold to.
Yeah, but the amount of people which are active in a certain field, if you also take the European community, which is criticized a lot, if you just see the amount of people who are working there, it's less than the Dutch tax authority for the income tax. So it's nearly nothing. Huh? So, but if I would just take, let's say, minimum wage, that's just a decision which you take in a certain country, and there is nobody who is, let's say, there's not that there are enormous amount of people discussing minimum wage all the time in a kind of a department. No, it's just at a certain time people say, okay, it makes sense to discuss, do we want to have child labor? And then at a certain point we said, no, those children in the factories producing fabric, not a good idea. It's not humane. Those children should go to school, and they all should go to school. So we said it's obligatory to go to school until a certain age. Then we said we should have a minimum wage. And then we said, if you employ people, they should have health insurance, and so on and so on. How would you have solved this kind of topics if you said, dear company owners, it would be very, very nice if you could discuss on a local level if you want to implement minimum wage or something like that?
Well, I mean, there is an argument to say that could have been quite possible, right? The power of citizens to say, well, I'm not going to buy. I mean, to some extent, we saw that, right? In London, for example, there was this creation of the living wage, right? So that there's no requirement for firms to offer the living wage in London, but there is now a great deal of social pressure on firms to provide the living wage for their staff, and so a lot of the major professional services firms and others in London will now come out and say, well, we pay everybody the living wage, including the cleaners, and to a large degree, as I understand it, that's big as a result of social pressure on these firms. So I don't think government regulation is the only tool for social change, and that seems to be her premise here, right?
Yeah, but if
or
you,
at least
if you,
government action, she would. To be fair to her,
yeah,
she
but if you
regulation.
then take statistics, if you take life expectancy or health, etc., then you still end up again in let's say in the Scandinavian countries. So I think it's
or Bhutan, right?
Yeah,
which I'm guessing doesn't have a huge social expenditures, right?
Yeah, okay, but this, if we just let's say stay in Europe as an example, then I also think it's just more efficient. But I also see it in the financial sector. Just to take one last example, where you talk a lot about self-regulation. Self-regulation, to my point of view, is incredibly inefficient. So it would make much more sense to have a external body, and it can be the government, etc., department, etc., that says, okay, these are the rules. So because if you really want to avoid a lot of bureaucracy, and I take just the financial sector as an enormous actual good example, there is so much discussion going on, which is called in self-regulation. Regulation always works very well when it's not a self-regulation, because what would be the interest of a bank to have very clear rules on let's say money laundering, etc. So that's there's enormous bureaucracy or enormous stuff going on, but it would be much more efficient to have very, very simple governmental rules. And I would say the minimum wage is a very good example. Election rights is a very good example. So I totally agree with Mazzucato that this idea is that the state is inefficient and private companies are much more efficient is in a lot of cases is just not true. So if you talk, and I find public transport an excellent example, because we have done the whole thing there. So we've privatized it, and we just found out no, it didn't work. Why does it not work? Because you don't have competition, and it also doesn't make sense to have competition. So okay, you have two companies, rail companies, and they both connect Edinburgh with London or something like that. Does it work in the end? No, it doesn't. And you can just prove it. So everybody who wants to know how public transport functions or really works pretty well, come to Switzerland. When a train is 1 minute late, they say, sorry, we have to apologize, train is 1 minute late. So, and it works perfectly well.
Right. Yes, and I can't argue with that, right? I mean, I'm well aware of the efficacy of the Swiss train system.
But we will do one in future. Then I will invite you to Switzerland, and then we'll drive into the mountains, and then we also can go through a pass, the Verreina Pass, and then it says the train will start at minute X, and it exactly goes at minute X, and it's this foreigner. They're always totally amazed. Or you have to register. My wife had to register her car, and they said you have an appointment on 15:33, but exactly be on time. And 33, then you see this time, and then it's your appointment. And that's the whole way this works. It's all government, huh? So if you have a question about your tax formula, you call somebody and they take up the phone, or they call you back on your mobile on the same day. So it's not that government is inefficient or government is much more expensive. It's just not the case, because there are a lot of examples where it works excellent. It works excellent. You get a formula, your son will be in school, blah, 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 and with the whole schedule, etc. It works perfectly well.
Right. But I also think that what's great, again, back to the small is beautiful paradigm, what I understand of the way Swiss government works is they're much more federated, right? They're much less centralized than most with the most state and most developed nations, right? And the power is devolved down to a local level, and you've got
that's right. But the starting point is you have a certain agreement on, let's say, public infrastructure. The trains is national, and the main railroads are is a national topic, and that works pretty well. But in, let's say, most European continental countries, the university system works excellent. The school system works excellent. What does not work excellent? Private part, which is before they go to kindergarten. That's a mess. It's a mess in the Netherlands. So I would be against this way. It should be the responsibility of the state to capture this part as well, and not starting taking responsibility when children are 4, because especially also from a social point of view, until the age of 4, there's a lot of development going on, and then people who can afford put their children in a nice childcare, and people who can't afford, they're trying to solve it in another way. So, but that's the point she makes mainly in the book, that our whole view of that private companies are much better in solving all our world problems is not true. And I agree on that. Although I'm an entrepreneur, and I say, if you can guarantee that in a lot of parts of society or in our economic way of dealing with each other, there is enough competition, like we are a commercial company, we do mortgage advice, a lot of others will also do, and then you have competition, etc. But there is a regulation, for instance, that we're not allowed to get money from the suppliers. Excellent. It's so enormously efficient and it's so transparent, and everybody knows we are not paid by those banks, we're paid by the client. Excellent example of very highly efficient regulation by the state.
Right. Well, and I mean, that's something I do agree with her on, right? I don't think profit-seeking, shareholder value-driven private institutions can save our problem. Absolutely not, right? So that's another area where I have strong agreement with her. I mean, I think that the idea of a shift to shareholder capitalism, or a form of capital that's much more rooted in the values of the communities that they serve, is absolutely the way to go. And I think, in fact, one of the things that she frustrated me when she talks about that form of capitalism, and if I can find the quote here, but she's effectively saying that there's little evidence of this. So far, there is little evidence that this is actually. So she talked. I'll read the full quote. While there are movements afoot to get business to move away from pure maximization of profits and shareholder value towards a more stakeholder-driven governance structure, so far there is little evidence that this is actually changing anything beyond the feel-good factor. No. There is plenty of evidence of a shift in the way that people are approaching capitalism. Your firm, as a prime example, and many of them, and something that's obviously close to her is the environmental accident. I had Tom Saki on the My Being Human podcast. He's running TerraCycle over in the US, and he's solving recycling issues on a purely commercial basis, working with other commercial firms on how they can get more of their products recycled. So it's totally not true that there's little evidence. There is a wealth of evidence of a massive growing movement of a shift in the way people are doing capitalism. B Corps, these not-for-profit companies are growing massively. Patagonia, you could go on and on and on, naming firms in this shift in capitalism. And she does. So she points to that, and I applaud her for pointing to that, but it's just not true that there isn't a big shift happening there.
Okay, I wouldn't agree with that, but it doesn't matter. I think this book should be read by 2 categories of people. On the one hand, it should be read by people who, let's say, always thought they're very skeptical and they're much more in favor of, let's say, taking the government more responsibility. But that's the obvious group. But the other half, which doesn't agree with it at all and says, no, everything should be privatized, they also should read the book. It's always much more interesting to read stuff which you don't agree with, because it sharpens the brain, so to say. So I think she's doing an excellent job, and I really would looking forward if you would have her in your show. She does a lot of talks, because I think the discussion will always help in the end, or will a big help for all of us, because in a way we have to solve these global issues.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't want to let you off the hook with you disagreeing with. So you don't think there's a movement in a shift in the way people are doing capitalism? That intrigues me, given as I see you as being part of that movement.
Yeah, but that also would give you food for thought. I mean, we are a third time in a row best employer, trying to change this financial sector. But I say, for instance, in the financial sector, self-regulation is no regulation. It's not a regulation. Regulation is from an external party. What would be the interest of the most players in the field to regulate themselves? Why would they? So they try to avoid and lobby against it. So it's like Coca-Cola using our plastic problem, or cigarette companies telling us about our health issues, etc. No, you have to. That's the role of the state, and we should ask together, also, for instance, as industries, as a financial industry, to regulate with distance, also with another, let's say, interest. It's a common interest, so they have to regulate this not only from an industry point of view, but for as a society as a whole. And it is in the end much more efficient. And this example of that we're not able or not allowed to take money from our suppliers has done. She has done. Let's say the government has done everybody a huge favor. The whole industry became much more efficient.
This is for specifically in your so in your case, advice. If you in mortgage advice, so you can't. So what does that mean? You can't take a commission when you sell.
The client pays us for the advice.
Okay, purely. Okay.
So in the end, you got 1% on the loan, and then the client says, "Yeah, why does this consultant recommend bank A and not bank B? Perhaps he or she gets much more from bank A or bank B." That problem has been solved, and what also happened is that, let's say, the advice fee people have to pay corresponds with the amount of work the advice is. So a simple mortgage for somebody who is employed is easier because it's just less time consuming, and somebody who's an entrepreneur and a lot of entities, etc., and wants to buy, I don't know, something which is pretty complicated, or then you need just more time. So it's in the end and fee based on the amount of hours you need, and it has made the whole sector much more efficient. The rates went down with, let's say, are half of it now, and then you still have the whole discussion about automation, etc., and linking data, but the main driver there was let's say the role of the government. But I also think that everything which has to do with social regulation, if you talk about minimum wages and etc., or value added taxes, etc., it is an enormous efficient way of organizing, because it's the rule which applies to anybody who is taking part in the whole game.
Right. Yeah, and I would just, but that's one way. I mean, could it not have happened that you would have got some firms who started to say, or either were very transparent about their fees, or they made a stance and they said, we're not going to take any commission, and they would have over time gained more trust of their consumers, and they would have built greater market share, and over time you had an effect where the whole market would flip over.
But let's just end an example with the airplane. So the problem is that in the end, we think short term and in an egoistic way in a lot of cases. So if you have a possibility, or in general, there's a possibility of flying with EasyJet to Barcelona from London for $25, and there would be an alternative which says, okay, I have added all the external costs which should be added, and it costs 10 times more. Still, nobody would fly with this external, with this new carrier. And that's the big problem. So if you want to change something, it should be level playing field, which is a very old liberal principle, that the game should be with the rules which apply to all the players in the field. And that's something which in the tax environment also does not apply. So Google doesn't pay any taxes. Apple also doesn't. But this small startup, which becomes a little bit bigger, doesn't have the possibility of avoiding taxes by difficult juridical construction, which costs an enormous amount of money to have set up by lawyers. So it's also, if you talk about equal level playing field for those people, it's not a liberal principle. It's the opposite.
Right. Yeah. And I think that once you're in a situation where you've got these actors acting in bad faith, then maybe you have to fight fire with fire. I agree with that. But I guess it's just, where do we place our attention and what do we put our hope and our faith in? And for me, it's focusing in on where we've got voluntary action at a local level and seeking to amplify and encourage that as a solution. But maybe that's just where we'll have to leave it.
Yeah, I think we wrap it up. And and I'm looking forward to your conversation with Mariana Mazzucato.
Right. Yeah, which I would walk into with some trepidation, being a trained engineer, not economist. She'd probably eat me for breakfast, but it might be fun trying. Good. Okay. Well, thanks so much. So once again, for people, it's Mission Economy, a moonshot guide to changing capitalism. Yeah. And definitely worth it, whichever side of the spectrum you're on. And certainly I found there was a lot of what I agreed with her on, but plenty that I didn't. So it was good.
Yeah, but perhaps just the last remark. We just saw by coincidence, I think yesterday, that Jeffrey Sachs, who also started the book club. I don't know if he got the inspiration from us. I don't think so. Also is discussing the book. So at the moment, it's a book which is pretty. Let's say lively discussed. So for all those people who want to read more or listen to more discussions, just Google Jeffrey Sachs book club.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of You Should Read This with me, Richard Atherton, and my fantastic co-host, Tom van der Lubbe. If any of the material in this show resonated with you, if you're thinking, perhaps, how could I take these ideas and apply them in my own leadership or take them forward into my own organization, then I would love to have a conversation with you about that. If that feels like that could be a valuable use of your time, then please do click on the Calendly link in the description for this episode. And that will allow you to book a slot directly into my calendar. And I hope to speak to you soon.